In this video, I'm going to show you guys how to layer huge techno leads like this. Call and response is an important component of all music, but especially in electronic music where you have really repetitive and short motifs, you need to make sure that your music is constantly creating tension and release. So within every track, there can be multiple call and response pairs. And you can create these through melodies, or you can make them through drum elements that feel like they're talking to each other. But in this particular example that I'm going to show you, I take call and response as a concept and make it a forefront element of the track's identity. So let's get into it. Here we are in FL Studio. This is just a project I've been working on recently, and it utilizes a really big call and response moment. So I thought it'd be cool to dive into the sound design and the ideas behind this specific call and response. So you already heard the loop idea in the intro, but let me play you just the synth elements themselves that comprise of the call and response. So here we go. So the theme is obvious. There's a simple call that hits first, and then with the same notes, this response hits with a complexity of layers and different sounds. Let's dive into the call here. So this is just a preset that I found from a preset pack. I don't want to dive too deep into the sound design here. So it's a simple sound. Nice and detuned, has chorusing on it. Something to note, there's some glide on it. It's in legato mode. So here's the notes. There's a slight glide each time the notes hit. Then let's move on to the big layers now. So that Diva patch hits again here at 93, but along with it hit a bunch of other layers. And so let's look into these. Here's the first main one. You can hear that pitch glide is in this one as well. So it's on legato, polyphony of 1, and a pretty long glide time here. So if we didn't have this on, let's hear what that sounds like. So it doesn't have that cool pitchy effect. The core source of this sound is from these saws here. So let me turn off these effects for a second. The main generator is just a sawtooth. It's on unison, has two sawtooths playing against each other, a decent detune, and the spread is all the way up, so creating a nice stereo effect. There's this extra sawtooth here, just providing some more emphasis on the center channel. And I also put a macro on the harmonic parameter here, so that way I have the option later on to automate some further detune against the main saw here. So the key to this whole sound though is definitely the distortion. I'm really cranking the gain through this distortion here. I'm putting the drive all the way up. It's on hard clip, which is a pretty extreme style of distortion. So with all this, I wanted to shift the distortion here though and push the character so that the mids are more present overall. So I drove the distortion with an EQ here, and I really just went crazy on this EQ. I mean, there's probably some better ways I could have went about this, but whenever I'm sound designing, I'm not really caring about making things look pretty. I just want to get the job done however it works. So there's just a bunch of peak nodes stacked on top of each other, and they're all really just pushing around this 500 hertz area and just really exaggerating it. So with this on, has more of like a crunchy, almost guitar-like sound to it now. And beyond that, it's just some less important effects on FL here. So I have an EQ and it's just cutting lows. This stuff is almost negligible, but you can see what it's cutting down here. Don't need any of that. Then I took advantage of some reverb to open up the space on it a bit. It's a pretty healthy dose of reverb. I wanted to really emphasize the feeling of space on this response layer so that everything feels big whenever the response comes in. So the other thing to note is there's this pitch automation here, and this is on top of the glide with the legato that we already have. So it starts 2 semitones down and then goes up to default pitch. And then without it, pitch automation like this, to me, always makes the sound feel more alive for some reason. So I really like to utilize it a lot. The next sound here is this one. So the core to this sound is these two samplers here. And really it's mostly this bottom one. So this is a vocal sample that I found from a sample pack and I threw it in here and I'm just looping this section of it. It's on ping pong mode. So that means that the sample is going to enter this loop right here and then play through and then play backward and then play through again indefinitely as long as the sound is sustained. I put the sampler on unison and there's 4 voices playing so that it feels like this big choir. There's a little bit of spread on it, not fully open on the stereo field, and then detune is up a little bit. This sample by itself to me was a little too simple though. It just sounds too much like a voice turned into a pad. And I wanted to make it a little bit more interesting with this breath sample right here. So this just adds like this little top end shimmer to it. Kind of dirties it up. Same principles as the other one, has this ping pong loop mode on here. The unison here though is just on 2. I didn't want to smear the sound of it with multiple voices. Then the spread here is all the way up, so it's fully open on the stereo field. An interesting bit about this sound though, is I'm pushing this vocal bit through to lane 2. And it's just going straight to the master out. But the breath here, I'm pushing through to lane 1, which has a frequency shifter on it. And this just has a little subtle effect of pushing the tonality a little higher up. So without it, with it, not a crazy difference, but it just gelled the sound together a little better. So this vocal synth in combination with that first layer now sounds like this. And so with this vocal synth, I'm choosing to leave off the last note here that the other MIDI clips have. With vocal synths in general, whenever you're creating vocal pads, you tend to have a very small range in which the vocals actually sound good before they sound like you're just playing kind of like chipmunk kind of stuff or these really like low, like unnatural tones. I put a few effects on here on this vocal synth just to tighten things up and again, make sure that the mids are present enough and not too dominated by the highs. So here's this EQ. Just making sure no lows are getting through, pushing the mids a little bit. Then OTT, just tightening up the sound. Then Saturn here, again, just kind of crunching it a little bit and make sure the mids are more boosted than the other tones of the sound. Another pro cue, just making sure no lows are coming through now that we have Saturn here that might have introduced some low end artifacts. And then reverb here. Less intense than the other reverb, but makes it feel more natural still. Then onto this third one here. The purpose behind this one was to kind of just create a bit of a wild card sound. I wanted to layer up the other 2 smoother sounds with something more staccato and sort of broken. So this one looks a little more complicated, but at the source, it really is just this square wave. Has a unison of 2, and that's just to give it some stereo width here. This sounds like this. Then with the filter on. The key to this sound though is really all of this modulation down here. This is what's creating that gated effect. So to begin with, I'm going to turn on this second LFO and this one's connected to the gain right here. Then this first one here is connected to the cutoff. But where the sound gets more interesting is that I have this modulator, which is connected to the other 2 modulators. So what's happening here is this square wave is moving the rate of these other 2 LFOs up and down. So it's going between 1 and 18. And 18 is a strange number here, but I really wasn't concerned with getting some exact fractions going on here. I was just moving knobs around and seeing what landed. And so here's where I landed. So you can hear how things are speeding up and slowing down with the LFOs. There's also this sine wave here. This one is slowly moving the cutoff around a little bit. And then it also slightly affects the depth of LFO 1 here. So LFO 1 sometimes doesn't push this cutoff up a lot. So yeah, just some little extra interesting movement. Next, we have this envelope here, and this is just controlling the delay. It's controlling the mix amount. So the reason I put it on is so that when a MIDI note is hit, the mix opens up, but then as soon as the MIDI note is released, the mix goes down. So I have a pretty huge and lush delay, but it doesn't continuously drag on after I let the note go. For the effects on this one, I have some distortion with Rift. It's nothing too wild. I just dialed in a bit of this bounce wave shaper here. Then Pro Q3 here. Main thing to really note is just cutting off the lows. You don't want any loose ends on the lows down there. And then just shaping things up a little bit with these. Then Saturn here. This is squashing the sound a little bit and adding a little bit of buzz. Then of course, anytime you add a distortion, make sure you add another EQ, cut off those lows that are now introduced. See all that stuff down there. The key thing to note with all these effects is that I'm trying to make sure the mid-range is really solid and has a certain power to it. I used to have a problem where I would have my high end too present in relation to the mids, and that just creates this kind of weak sound overall. And so, yeah, I'm just shaping things up a bit here. And just to drive the point home, I mean, before the effects, and then after. So there's still a high end presence, but the mids are more dominant. Let's hear the three of these together. Then let's move on to the fourth layer here. So as opposed to the other ones, the key to this one really will all be about the effects here. But just to show you the core of the sound. The point of this one is to add a big, bassy, raspy body to all of the layers. So I started off with the saw wave here, and it has a unison of 3, with some decent detune. Then it has a filter. Then there's a sawtooth here. And with these oscillators, I just wanted to bring something together that had low end to it and was sharp, but not too sharp, still had some overlap and a little bit of messiness to the high end. So that way I can push something really interesting into Rift here and get a little bit crazy with the distortion. So I blended in a mix of this harmonic wave folding style and this plexus wave folding style. But then I added an EQ right here. And I wanted to drive the distortion differently. And so whenever you add an EQ before distortion, you can really change how the distortion unit reacts to the sound. So after that, I added Decimort. This is a bit crusher. And the point of this is to rein in the very high end brittle frequencies, but then also smooth out the remaining high end. So next we have Pro Q, and always do a low cut after distortion stuff. I'm utilizing these nodes just to shape things up a little bit. Then Volcano and Fruity Balance here. I mean, these are just for automation throughout the arrangement. Now that we have this fourth layer and the last piece of the puzzle done, let's go ahead and hear the whole context once again. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you want those sounds from the phase plant layers, then I'll leave a link in the description for those. As always, a thumbs up on the video is really appreciated, and subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up with more videos about sound design and production. And let me know in the comments, what are your favorite ways to utilize call and response for your own tracks? Or let me know if there's anything I should dive deeper into in relation to melodies and motifs and stuff like that. That's it for this one though. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.